In the small village of Eldermire, nestled between jagged hills and thick forests, a legend spoke of a spirit that thrived on fear. The villagers often whispered tales of the fear spirit in hushed tones, warning children to stay away from the whispering woods. The woods were known for their eerie silence, interrupted only by the unsettling rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Shadows twisted into grotesque shapes as if eager to snatch away anyone foolish enough to wander too close after dusk. That day, a boy named Oliver, curious and brave, chose to trespass into those dreaded woods. Oliver was a 10-year-old boy with tousled brown hair and bright, sparkling eyes that always seemed to be searching for something exciting to do. He had a lightning bolt of a personality and a heart that raced at the mere thought of adventure. Living in the cozy village of Eldermire, he heard countless tales of knights, dragons, and brave explorers. However, the story he loved the most was about the fear spirit, a dark figure rumored to lurk within the whispering woods. Oliver had always been drawn to adventure. Whether it was climbing the tallest tree in Eldermire or exploring the small creek that wound its way near the village, he relished in each chance to uncover something extraordinary. His heart would race at the thought of hidden treasures, forgotten castles, and magical creatures waiting to be discovered. He had heard the chilling stories from his friends about how the fear spirit roamed the forest, seeking souls to consume with its malevolent whispers. Despite the spine-tingling tales spoken in frightened voices, he felt a strong tug of excitement and bravery that pushed him to explore more. Ignoring his mother's warnings and the anxious pleas of his friends, Oliver ventured deep into the forest with nothing but a small lantern and his unwavering courage to guide him. The lantern, a bright yellow beacon that flickered in the dark, was his shield against the unknown. He imagined it was a magical light that could ward off any dangers lurking beyond the tree line. As he walked deeper into the woods, the sunlight began to wane. The shadows around him began to lengthen, stretching like elongated fingers ready to ensnare him. The air grew colder, filling his lungs with a cloying dampness that felt almost alive. Each breath was colder than the last, sending shivers down his spine. Though he felt a prickle of fear tingle at the back of his mind, he dismissed it as just the cold, convinced that he was braver than the stories he had heard. The deeper he ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became, as if the very trees themselves were watching him, their gnarled branches twisting and turning like ancient guardians of a hidden secret. Leaves whispered secrets of the past as a gust of wind swept through, rustling the foliage and sending a chill down his back. Oliver shook his head, telling himself it was just the wind playing tricks on him. He felt as though he wasn't truly alone. The forest seemed to pulse with a heartbeat, and he could almost hear it thrumming in time with his own. It was a rhythm reminiscent of something malevolent lurking just out of sight. What he didn't know was that the fear spirit had been drawn to his courage, enticed by his unyielding spirit. It was a clinging darkness that thrived on terror, a malevolent force that embraced the minds of the fearful, twisting their thoughts until they frayed at the edges. The tales told by the villagers were not merely stories, they were warnings of a real and present danger. With every step Oliver took, the spirit silently followed, weaving itself into the very fabric of his thoughts. The longer he walked, the more unsettling his surroundings became. Giant trees seemed to loom overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, while the underbrush crunched ominously beneath his feet. As daylight flickered, casting spooky shadows that played tricks on his eyes, Oliver stumbled upon a clearing. At the center lay an old, decaying statue, its features worn and unrecognizable. This grotesque figure looked as though it had once been someone great but had twisted into a nightmarish form over centuries, its face barely visible under layers of moss and decay. Oliver hesitated, sensing an ominous presence in the clearing. The statue seemed to breathe in the stillness, its deranged smile mockingly beckoning him closer. He felt a blend of fear and intrigue coil within him, a push and pull like a string being pulled taut. But compelled by an insatiable curiosity, he inched forward, mesmerized by its eerie beauty. Suddenly, the wind howled, a guttural sound that rolled through the branches like a beast awakened. Oliver's heart raced as shadows danced around him, expanding and contracting like the tide. A sense of dread began to seep in, souring the thrill of adventure into something unsettling. He turned to leave but found that the path he had walked vanished, swallowed by thick underbrush that silently closed around him. Panic surged within him, twisting like an iron band around his chest. He called out, but his voice was swallowed by an oppressive silence. The forest seemed to hum, a low and macabre tune that resonated in his bones. It was then that he heard it, a whisper, soft yet unmistakably sinister. Fear. Fear. Fear? The words slithered into his ears, curling around his mind and squeezing tight. They wrapped themselves around his thoughts like a putrid vine, causing every inch of him to tremble. Doubts began to creep in, gnawing at his bravery, pulling him down into an abyss of terror that threatened to consume him. Oliver stumbled backward, his heart pounding like thunder as the chilling realization settled in. The fear spirit was real. He spun around, eyes wide as he sought an escape. The trees groaned as if laughing at his plight, their branches clawing at the air with jagged fingers. His breath came in short gasps, the icy fingers of panic clawing at his throat. He could almost feel the spirit, a twisted shape lurking just out of sight, its breath like foul wind sending chills through his very soul. The whispers grew louder, weaving through his mind like a demonic symphony. Each note played deeper into his subconscious, dragging forth insecurities and fears he never knew he had. "You cannot escape," it sang, its voice dripping with the honeyed sweetness of lies. "You're trapped in this forsaken place, a plaything for my amusement." Taking a deep breath, Oliver realized that he needed to fight back. He remembered his mother's words, the lessons he learned about facing fear when it looms large and monstrous. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," she often told him. "It's about pressing on despite being scared." With every ounce of courage, he tightened his grip on the lantern, its glow cutting through the dark like a beam of hope. "Leave me alone," he shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing, bouncing off the towering trees. The ancient statue, with its malevolent grin, seemed to shudder in response, and for a heartbeat, silence fell around him. The air became still, and for a moment, it felt as if the forest was holding its breath. But then, from the shadows, the whispers returned, louder than before. "You think you can defy me? I am the fear that lives in the deepest parts of your mind. You cannot escape." With every syllable, he felt the spirit's presence pressing closer, wrapping around him like a shadowy cloak. It tugged at his thoughts, a cold tendril snaking around his heart. "No," Oliver cried, shaking his head. He began to walk briskly, trying to move away from the statue and the weight of the fear it represented. He would not let the fear spirit win. He would not be a prisoner in this dark, twisted place. Just when he thought he could turn back, the ground beneath him shifted, and Oliver lost his balance, falling onto the damp earth. As he looked up, he found himself surrounded by tall trees, tall and imposing that felt as though they were closing in on him. Panic flooded his senses, and he took a deep breath, reminding himself of the lantern's warm light. The woods twisted and turned around him, but he focused on the flickering glow ahead, a beacon in the darkness. He scrambled to his feet, determination pushing him forward. Every step felt heavy, like wading through thick fog, but with each step, he found a flicker of bravery igniting within him. He remembered the stories of the brave heroes who faced their fears and conquered evil with the power of friendship. Perhaps he was alone now, surrounded by the shadows of the whispering woods, but he was also a hero in his own story. Heroes didn't just defeat monsters, they confronted them, shining their light into the deepest darkness. With renewed energy, he called out defiantly, "You won't win. I'm not afraid of you." The determination in his voice made the shadows quiver. He held up his lantern high, the glow dancing against the dark trunks of the trees. In that moment, he understood that the fear spirit thrived on the very terror it instilled, and the more he resisted, the weaker it became. Fear, fear, fear. The whispers coiled around him, but he took a deep breath and pushed forward, moving as fast as he could. He narrowly dodged gnarled branches that seemed to stretch out as if trying to snag him, their shadows flickering like creatures of the night. Each courageous step felt monumental, the light from his lantern brighter than before. As he ran, the whispers began to fade, the presence of the fear spirit lifting as he embraced his bravery. The darkness that had once felt so all-consuming now shrank back into the shadows. Finally, as he burst through the trees and into the safety of the open field beyond, a sense of triumph washed over him. The sun had dipped lower on the horizon, casting long, golden rays of light that chased away the dark. He turned back to look at the whispering woods, heart pounding, panting but triumphant. "Next time, I'll be ready for you," he called out into the woods, his voice strong and steady. That day, Oliver learned an important lesson. Courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about facing fear head-on and knowing that even in the darkest places, light can always find a way to shine through. As he made his way home, the village of Eldermire welcomed him back with its own warmth. Although he had faced the fear spirit, he felt the thrill of adventure still tingling in his bones, a spark that promised future quests and tales yet to be told. Oliver had ventured into the depths of the Whispering Woods and returned not just as a brave boy, but also as a hero of his own story. And he would carry that light within him, forever ready to face whatever came next. Oliver pressed deeper into the disorienting woods, driven by a panic that clawed at his mind like a wild animal. The whispers followed him, swirling in the damp air around him. Each voice was more cloying and insidious than the last, creeping into his thoughts unexpectedly, like uninvited guests at a party. They were not just sounds, they were intimate thoughts, whispering all the ways he had failed. He could almost hear them hissing, "You're afraid. You will never escape this twisting nightmare." Shadows flickered at the corners of his eyes, figures that danced just out of view, taunting him from the depths of his fears, almost as if they relished in his discomfort. His heart raced, pounding like a drum in a parade, a blood-curdling rhythm that matched the erratic pounding of his thoughts. Every week, whispering words seemed to poke at his brain, reminding him of how hopeless things felt. He stumbled over roots and stones, the ground uneven beneath his feet, desperate to find a way out, wishing with all his might that he could wake from this bad dream. But with every frantic step, the forest seemed to close in around him, tighter and tighter. The trees loomed like dark giants, silent sentinels that kept guard over something sinister. Their darkened branches reached for him as if seeking to pull him into their gnarled embrace, trapping him in a world of shadows and fear. The very air around him felt thick and suffocating, as though it was infused with the essence of dread itself, making him feel as if he were wading through a thick fog. "Face your fears," the whisper echoed in his mind, dripping with mockery, as if the unseen spirit of the forest was giggling at his plight. Oliver shook his head, trying to dispel the panicked thoughts that clawed at his sanity. "Face your fears," he murmured to himself, a pitiful attempt to reassure himself, but deep down, he knew this was no ordinary fear he faced. This fear felt alive, sentient, a dark, demoniac force that fed on despair and relished in the agony of others. The fear spirit was playing a game, and Oliver was its unwilling pawn, forced to dance to the chaotic music of his own terror. Further into the labyrinth of towering trees, he stumbled upon a broken bridge stretching over a dark chasm that seemed to breathe ominously, as if it were alive. The wood was rotten, jagged, and splintered, each age-worn board a testament to neglect and despair. From below, a putrid stench wafted up, a horrible blend of decay and hopelessness that merged with the panic rising within him. The air grew heavier, thick with an undercurrent of darkness that pulsed stronger here, as though the spirit considered this place the heart of its domain, feeding off the sorrowful echoes of lost souls that ventured too close. Against the warning bells ringing violently in his mind, Oliver felt drawn to it, wanting to see what lay beyond the bridge's desperate creaking. He stepped cautiously onto the bridge, trembling with uncertainty. The wood creaked ominously underfoot, a sound like the groan of a slumbering giant, warning him of the impending doom. Each step felt heavy, the pressing weight of fear wrapped around him like a shroud, a cloak of shadows that whispered grim secrets. He reached the halfway point when the whispers crescendoed into a shrill chorus, as though the very spirits of the forest clamored to claim him. "You are nothing. You will never escape," they echoed, the words shrieking through the air as though the forest itself was alive, angry and livid at his hope. It was there, hanging precariously over the abyss, that Oliver felt a shiver of cold wash over him, a stark reminder that he was not alone. The shadows twisted into grotesque forms, ominous silhouettes that beckoned him forward. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling light, a hunger reflected within them. The fear that pulsed through him morphed into sheer terror. They seemed to grow larger, more ravenous, insatiable in their desire to consume him. Suddenly, the bridge shifted beneath him. The wood, old and splintered, creaked and groaned dangerously, a jagged crack spreading across the planks like the fissures in his mind. In an instant, Oliver found himself teetering, one foot dangling perilously over the void as the haunting laughter of the forest seemed to fill his ears, rattling him to his core. Time stretched out around him, Each heartbeat drummed loudly in his chest, echoing in his ears. He grasped for something, anything, to hold onto, desperate for stability. He stared into the chasm below, its darkness swirling with a sinister allure, almost drawing him in. Somewhere deep within that pitch-black void lay the essence of his fears, the truth he had buried deep down, what the spirit had dragged to the surface for him to witness. With an instinctual jerk, Oliver stumbled backward, a wave of nausea washing over him as he fought to regain his composure. He shifted his glance to the shadows enveloping him, their features becoming clearer. Twisted faces with eyes wide and hollow stared back, haunting reminders of how he felt. He could feel their breath, cold and rancid, as a wind swept across his skin, sending icy chills racing through him. They reached out, fingers skeletal and claw-like, grasping at him with unholy desire. The fear spirit had sent its minions to further unravel him, each embodiment parading before his eyes, showcasing the fragility of his very existence. The shadows whispered sweet yet malevolent promises, promises that felt strangely delicious yet dangerous. "Join us," they hissed, their voices wrapping around him like vines. "Embrace your fear, we will show you the truth." Oliver recoiled, shaking his head, desperately clinging to his will to resist. But the shadows pressed closer, their cries growing louder, clawing inward to breach his mind. "You cannot win, you are lost," they taunted, and in that moment, Oliver felt the first tendrils of despair blanket him like a dark fog, suffocating and all-encompassing, wrapping around him tighter. He ran. His feet thundered against the wooden planks of the bridge, splinters digging painfully into his palms as he grasped the railing in a futile attempt to steady himself. The shadows followed, relentless in their pursuit, hungry for the taste of his terror. The spirit's presence surged, pulsing through the air around Oliver, each ripple entwining with his heartbeat. It surged through him, wrapping tightly around his core like a constricting snake, feeding on his panic like a ravenous beast. With a desperate leap, he jumped from the bridge, landing on solid ground with a dull thud that reverberated through his bones. The shadows swirled around him, closing in as he stumbled forward, heart racing wildly. The path became twisted, branches looming overhead like the fingers of death ready to ensnare him. Every whisper, every promise, coiled tighter around his mind, and he could hear the spirit's laughter ringing out. A sickening echo that rattled through the woods, a blasphemous chorus rejoicing in his plight. "Face what you fear the most," the spirit taunted through the shadows, its voice rich with malice. "Let it consume you." The words dripped with poison, wrapping around him like a soft, choking embrace. Oliver knew he had to keep moving. He had to fight against the monster that lurked in the depths of his mind, now more alive than ever. A flood of despair became a bubbling cauldron of terror as he recalled all his greatest fears: failure, loneliness, darkness. All of it converging to smother him in a suffocating embrace, a black hole that sought to pull him under. Visions danced before his mind's eye, his friends abandoning him, their laughter turning to silence as they left him behind. Dread wove an intricate web in him, threading through his heart like a thief stealing away hope. The dark shapes around him grew more terrifying with every painful thought he had. The fear spirit feasted on this dread, twisting each vision into grotesque monsters, bizarre nightmares that made his skin crawl. The shadows beckoned him to succumb to despair, to let go of hope. It was intoxicating, almost a sweet surrender. But as he felt himself waver, an inner strength awakened deep within him. The refusal to accept what the spirit offered surged in his veins, like a flickering candle refusing to be blown out by the winds of despair. He pressed on, desperation fueling every frantic step as he lost himself in the labyrinthine chaos. And yet, the woods were alive. Their whispers multiplied, drowning him in a cacophony of haunting truths. "You will never be free," they shrieked, "you are trapped in the darkness." With each taunt, fear soared higher, each admission clawing more deeply into his heart. The spirit was relentless. It thrived, blossoming with his anguish, feeding off the raw nightmare he had become. But through it all, Oliver felt the darkness trying to consume him whole. Deep in his heart, he knew he had a flicker of light within him, a flame of hope that flickered gently, refusing to be extinguished. Somehow, he pushed through the terror and despair. He stumbled onward, panting heavily, catching a glimpse of something ahead, a light. A faint shimmer broke through the dense trees, glimmers of hope sparkling like stars against a pitch-black sky. Hope flared momentarily, igniting a fire against the cold grip of fear that threatened to consume him. Yet, as he rushed toward the light, a deep, resonant laugh echoed behind him. The shadows twisted, congealing, as if solidifying into a massive silhouette. The essence of the fear spirit rose into view, its form grotesque, malevolent, and all too real. With a guttural roar, it reached out for him, its claws stretching out like ancient roots reaching for prey. At that moment, Oliver froze, heart caught in his throat, realization dawning like the first light of dawn. He had merely been a puppet, danced upon strings leading him right into its gaping maw. But as fear threatened to claim him, another feeling surged up from the depths of his courage. He would not go quietly. He would not let the darkness win. He knew now that within him lay the power to fight. He was not just facing the spirit but his own fears, the truth that lay cloaked in shadows. Oliver drew a breath and summoned every ounce of courage he possessed, ready to confront the darkness head-on. In this moment of sheer determination, he stood not as a pawn but as a warrior prepared to reclaim his light. The forest around Oliver turned from deep green to a shadowy gray, as if the very essence of light was being swallowed whole by the overwhelming darkness that surged forward, forming a wall around him. Each tree was gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the air like skeletal fingers reaching out for him, eager to pull him into their cold embrace. It felt as if every shadow and rustle of the leaves conspired against him, deepening his sense of dread. Before him stood the fear spirit, a creature made of swirling mist and shadows. It towered high, so tall that its head seemed to touch the clouds, and its form was ever-changing, shimmering unpredictably as it flickered in the dim light. With a face that was nothing more than a distortion of cruel smiles and wicked grins, this figure instilled a fear so deep that it felt nearly suffocating. Its eyes were two deep pits of darkness, glimmering bright with a sickly emerald hue that pierced through the shroud of night like twin stars of the evilest kind. They were hungry eyes, glistening with the promise of despair, reflecting all the fears that resided within Oliver's heart. Oliver's heart raced wildly, pounding so violently that he could hear it echoing in his ears, drowning out the world around him. Each thud felt like a warning, urging him to run away and hide, but his body was as heavy as stones. It felt as if dread itself had settled deep in his chest, tightening like a vice and leaving him gasping for breath. The weight of his fears pressed down upon him, making it hard for him to think clearly, as if the fear spirit was drawing energy from his every anxious thought, devouring his courage inch by inch. "Come closer, dear boy," a low, hissing voice slithered out from between the spirit's trembling lips. "You are nothing but fear embodied. Come succumb to the shadows. Let me take you away from this endless suffering." Each word dripped with poison, wrapping around Oliver like chains, binding him to this menacing presence. Instinctively, Oliver stumbled backward, his legs moving with a speed born from primal panic. He desperately sought to escape from the creature that loomed over him like a storm, seeking shelter from an oncoming tempest. But the forest was no longer a friend. It had transformed into a dark labyrinth, its pathways twisting and turning into impossible shapes that only led him deeper into the belly of despair. As he ran, the trees closed in around him, their branches creaking like old bones as if they were mocking his every desperate attempt to escape. "Join me," the spirit growled again, its voice a deep, rumbling thunder. "Your fear is what I crave. Give in to it, and you will find peace at last." With every word, the air seemed to grow colder, deepening the shadows that wrapped around his limbs, making it harder for him to breathe. Despite Oliver's will to fight, despair crept closer, its tendrils curling around him, promising comfort in exchange for surrender. For a fleeting heartbeat, doubt seeped into his mind. What if this darkness could offer him solace? What if it could erase the loneliness that haunted him? The spirit's words painted a picture of safety amidst chaos, a sweet lure promising an end to his constant struggles. The shadows danced with promises of nothingness, enticing him to join them in eternal silence. "No," Oliver shouted, his voice breaking through the gloom like a ray of sunshine. It felt as though he was declaring his defiance against a wild beast, the fight igniting a flicker of strength within him. He willed himself to move, reminding himself that he was more than just fear. He was a boy who dreamed and laughed, who found joy in little things like the soft wisp of a butterfly's wings or the warmth of the sun on his face. The grotesque apparition before him would not steal those cherished memories. The shadows screamed in frustration, their furious howls echoing throughout the forest, distorting the very air around him. They lunged toward him like wild animals, desperate to drag him back into the darkness. Oliver sprinted forward, dodging and weaving through the branches that reached out to snag him. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest burning with exertion as he fought against the weight of dread chasing him, the spirit's voice echoing behind him. Run all you want. You can never escape yourself. You will always carry your fears with you. He plowed into a more profound darkness, stumbling into a clearing where the trees loomed like giants with twisted trunks and outstretched limbs. The ground beneath him felt cold and unwelcoming, and it was as if the very forest breathed in sync with his fear, feeding on his anguish. Panic surged within him, trying desperately to break through the icy grip of hopelessness that oozed from the earth, urging him to stay trapped in that enveloping darkness. In this shadowy cavern, Oliver felt as if the darkness was alive. Thick tendrils crawled around him, binding his chest in an unforgiving hug. It squeezed tighter, almost suffocating him until it felt like he couldn't draw in a single breath of the cold, stale air. Gasping, he realized that fear had wrapped itself around his heart like tightly coiled vines, entwining deeper with every moment. His thoughts spun wildly. Each fear he had ever faced, each worry that had lodged itself deep within him, manifested into monstrous forms, waiting eagerly to pull him under. Then, as if inevitable, he found himself standing on the precipice of a grisly chasm, a swirling void that seemed to pull in all light and color. The emptiness below beckoned him, inviting him to surrender himself to the endless night. Let it go, the spirit sang sweetly, each word curling into his mind. Take that final step, and you will forget all your pain. You were always meant to belong to the shadows. He peered into the depths, and there, swirling within the chaos, he saw every closed door of his heart burst open. His fears danced like evil spirits in a darkness that felt familiar yet terrifying. Each moment of embarrassment flashed before him. The time he had stumbled on stage at school, the time he had been left out during recess, and all the other times loneliness engulfed him like an unwelcome fog. They twirled around him, each memory a sorrowful wail, reminding him of painful chapters he wished could be forgotten. Oliver's heart raced in fear and confusion. Sobbing, he fought against the overwhelming desire to give in, to let the darkness consume him, for he feared he might find a twisted sense of comfort in it. The trees seemed to groan with delight, feeding off his anguish, their laughter mixing with the ominous rustling of leaves. It felt like a dreadful concert where the notes of despair played mercilessly over him, and he was a prisoner trapped in a melody made of suffering. Leave this reality behind, the spirit urged, each whisper sliding closer to him like a serpent, tempting him with sweet nothings meant to pry open the door of his heart. You need only to give in. There will be no more pain if you just leap. He opened his mouth to scream, to push back against the dark tide threatening to engulf him, but the flicker of determination grew weaker with each word the spirit spoke. It wrapped around him like thick fog, squeezing his spirit until he feared he might burst into tears. But then, amidst the chaos, a spark ignited within him, a flicker held back by the raging currents of darkness. He remembered who he was, a boy with dreams, a boy who had loved and laughed and fought against countless fears before this moment. No, I refuse, Oliver cried out, his voice breaking through the choking despair, fueled by an unexpected surge of defiance. He turned his back to the pit, the very symbol of his chaotic thoughts, and made an instinctive decision to choose hope over fear. It was a bold move, born from within the suffocating shadows. With each step he took away from the chasm, he felt the spirit wailing in defeat. The shadows recoiled slightly, drawing back as if a bright light began to pierce the surrounding darkness. Yet, in the spirit's rage, the air grew charged, and the darkness lashed out, sending a surge of shadowy tendrils shooting toward him, each one aiming to grab hold of his heart, to pull him back into the suffocating clutches. Panic consumed him once again, terror gripping his throat. As he stumbled, he felt like he might be swept away again, the darkness closing in, shouting once more that he would never escape himself. But deep within, the boy who refused to surrender fought against that notion with every ounce of strength he could muster. He dug deeper, recalling all that gave him light. The smell of fresh cookies baking in the oven, the feeling of warm sun on his skin as he ran through the grass, the laughter shared with friends. Those cherished memories filled him like a tide, pushing the shadows further back. In that moment, Oliver felt renewed. I am more than my fears. he shouted into the darkness, his voice a battle cry. With every ounce of his being, he pushed away from the creeping shadows, stepping into unknown territory where fear began to fade into the backdrop, a mere whisper in the distance. The spirit roared, its furious wail echoing through the forest, rattling the branches high above, yet Oliver stood his ground. But darkness can be a strong foe, and as he took those brave steps, the spirit lashed out one final time. The force of it struck him with the intensity of a storm, crashing down and pulling him into the traditionally dark abyss. He was yanked backward, caught in a swirl of shadow, the weight of anguish and despair thundering through him. The cacophony of laughter echoed all around, drowning out his hopes. "You see? You can't escape. You are trapped here forever." The spirit cackled, its voice coarse and rough, draping over him like an oppressive blanket. He felt the shadows weaving themselves around his limbs, confining him in a dark, monstrous embrace, threatening to crush him into the hollow void. With a final gasp, Oliver felt the world around him pulling him beneath an eternal darkness, every sense robbed of joy. The last flicker of light began to extinguish within him, as shadows consumed him whole, a cold, consuming despair that offered nothing but silence. But deep down, amid the swirling chaos, a small spark refused to be extinguished, refusing to believe that he had lost. And perhaps within that glimmer of defiance lay the key to his true fight against an ever-present darkness. Oliver found himself swept away into the depths of darkness. The weight of despair pressed down on him, squeezing the very life out of his being. It felt as if a heavy blanket made of sorrow and shadows wrapped itself tightly around him, making it hard to breathe. Time lost meaning, with days and nights blurring together like colors in a box of crayons spilled onto the floor. All that existed were the shadows, thick tunnels of blackness that wrapped tightly around each thought, each heartbeat, and each feeling. It was as if Oliver was stuck in a never-ending nightmare. The malevolent spirit lingered close, an ominous figure lurking in the darkness. Its presence was like a gloomy cloud that blocked out the sun, a vile reminder that he had succumbed to the very fears he had fought against. All the courage he had mustered seemed to melt away, leaving him feeling powerless, completely trapped in an inescapable gloom. Wretched whispers rang incessantly in his ears, echoing with a haunting clarity. "You have lost," they hummed, their tones curling around him like tendrils of smoke. It felt as if they were wrapping around his heart, squeezing it tighter with every word. "This is your fate, the culmination of your struggles. Embrace it, let it wash over you." The way the words curled and twisted around his mind was intoxicating, drawing him into a maddening spiral that threatened to erase all his resolve. He felt nothing but emptiness. All the colors of hope had washed away, leaving only various shades of gray in his heart. The forest had become a terrible labyrinth of torment, filled with branches and leaves that twisted like angry fingers, reaching out to consume him. The trees seemed to whisper and laugh in the darkness, their voices echoing through the maddening silence, relentless as they danced among the gnarled trunks. Shadows of those he had once known flitted at the edges of his vision. Familiar faces twisted in agony, their smiles turned into mocking grins that echoed hollow and cruel. But within that suffocating terror lay a chilling clarity. This was a prison of his own making. Every doubt he had ever acknowledged had turned tangible, now viscerally alive, each insecurity a malevolent force he could not escape. As flickering memories flashed through his mind like flickering candle flames, he now understood the frightening truth. The fear had always been there within him, lurking like a dark beast, waiting patiently for the moment he would break. Days stretched into what felt like an eternity as Oliver succumbed further. The feeling of abandonment tainted the edges of his mind like a shadow that refused to fade. Memories of laughter with his friends, sounds that once filled his heart with joy, had twisted themselves into grotesque caricatures, haunting him beneath a veil of despair. Every tortured heartbeat felt like a heavy stone, and the spirit tightened its grip, a cruel joy vibrant in its essence as it snuffed out every flicker of hope left inside him. He had transformed into a mere plaything, twisted by the ugly tendrils of terror that danced around him. Then came the silence, a horrifying quiet so deafening it echoed within the recesses of his mind. Oliver stood in the center of a blackened void, ensnared by shadows that whispered promises of oblivion. An oppressive darkness reached out to suffocate all remnants of who he had once been. Here, in the very heart of despair, he knew he was utterly lost. He cried out for help, desperate for someone, anyone, to hear him, but only the cruel hissing of the darkness filled the air, wrapping its tendrils around his heart and squeezing tighter still. The shadows converged around him, a swirling mass of darkness that coiled within, threatening to swallow him whole. In his heart, he felt the final glimmers of hope fade away. He fell deeper within this embrace of despair, and the whispers evolved into a twisted lullaby, soft yet sharp like an ice-cold breeze. The malevolent spirit that haunted him had become a part of him, its essence merging with every thought that flickered in his mind. He was lost, lost forever. The realization settled like a stone in his chest. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and he could feel the spirit's energy dancing around him. It wove intricate patterns of fear that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shadows beckoning him further into their terrifying fold. "You are free now," it crooned, its words dripping like poison from its gnarled mouth. "Let go of your suffering. This is your reality now. You belong to me." The dark forest twisted and swayed under the weight of its dance, shadows swirling in a macabre waltz around Oliver, urging him into the heavy depths of despair. Oliver felt as if he were suffocating, as if invisible hands made of darkness were tightly wrapping around him, spinning him through space. In those haunting moments of terror and confusion, he realized that the spirit was not merely an enemy he needed to fight. It resided deep within him, a collection of fears rendered manifest. With each passing heartbeat, the final vestiges of his will flickered and dimmed, completely surrendering to the malevolent presence that wrapped tighter around him, a fusion of shadow and sorrow. The once vibrant boy who had dared to wander into the whispering woods now seemed to vanish, like a candle being snuffed out by an unforgiving wind. He became a mere whisper, perhaps a shadow beneath the trees. The laughter of the spirits still echoed in the air, intertwined with the darkness left behind. It was a chilling testament to the legacy of fear that had claimed him and would continue haunting the depths of the whispering woods. But even as he faded into the background of despair, Oliver could not shake the flickering memories of his old life. He had once been a boy who loved to run and play, someone who spoke of dreams and laughter. There had been sunny days filled with hope and friends who stood beside him, encouraging him. Images of those bright moments battled through the shadows, trying to remind him of who he had been, who he still could be if only he could break free from this grasping darkness. Every memory was like a distant song, echoing in the corner of his mind, ghostly yet beautiful. He remembered the joy of finding a bright bluebird perched singingly atop a branch, the feeling of the warm sun on his skin as he played with his friends in the meadow. Those memories flickered like tiny stars in the night, trying to shine light on his overwhelming gloom. They told him he had not always been trapped in shadows, that there had been times when everything felt bright and safe. And what if he could find that light again? With that thought, a tiny spark ignited deep within him, a distant glimmer against the dark weight surrounding him. It was a flicker of determination, a reminder that perhaps this despair did not have to end him. Perhaps he could still try to fight back. It felt like a small whisper against the storm, but he knew it was there, urging him to remember how to believe, pushing him to seek the lights of hope that had once filled his heart. But as he pushed against the crushing despair, the spirit around him tightened its grip, sensing his flicker of defiance. The forest howled back with a chilling response, swirling shadows and whispers twisting ever closer, threatening to pull him back into the depths of despair. "You cannot escape," it warned, its voice a low, rumbling growl. "You belong to me. This is your fate." Yet, even amidst the dark tide of fear, Oliver felt something shift. The flicker of hope inside grew warmer, a tiny flame sparking to life. He remembered the laughter of his friends, their bright faces, and the adventures they had shared. Each memory was like a lifeline, a thread of light shining through his deeply guarded heart. If he could remember their love, could he not also find a way to reclaim his freedom? Oliver took a deep breath, filling his lungs with purpose, refusing to let the darkness swallow him completely. In that defining moment, as shadows loomed large around him, Oliver felt the shadows start to unravel. He focused on his memories, pulling them closer, letting each cherished moment wrap around him like a comforting blanket. "I am not afraid," he whispered into the encroaching blackness. "I will not let you take me." With each heartbeat, he felt a shift in the air, as though the malevolent spirit had begun to tremble. The grip it had on him loosened, just a fraction, but it was enough for him to draw strength from. No longer was he a mere whisper beneath the trees, now he was a fierce wind yearning for freedom. The darkness could feel the tide turning, It swirled around him in a frenzy, hissing with anger. "Stop," it screamed, but Oliver pressed on. He was no longer willing to submit to fear's cruel embrace. He called upon every memory, every laugh, and every moment of joy that he had once cherished, letting them surge through him like a river of light. As he drew upon this strength, something remarkable happened. The shadows began to ripple. The laughter of the spirits that had once mocked him transformed into echoes of encouragement. The gnarled trees around him, initially twisted and grotesque, softened, revealing hints of color that had long faded. Suddenly, tiny, glowing fireflies floated around him, illuminating the path before him, guiding Oliver back toward the light. The darkness around him didn't vanish. It hung still in the air, but it felt less oppressive now. He noticed that the shadows had lost some of their form, and he could see glimpses of the trees and the forest's beauty that had been hidden beneath despair. With each step he took, Oliver found that he was walking away from the heart of the shadows, rediscovering his own strength. With a newfound determination, he pressed forward. Each step brought him closer to the light found just beyond the heaviness of his fears. He might have been lost, but now he was finding his way back. The spirits whispered in surprise, their cruel laughter replaced by gasps of disbelief as they watched him reclaim his spirit. As he moved further away from the darkness, Oliver felt a warmth surround him, wrapping him in love and light. Something inside him began to change. The shadows that had once consumed him receded, retreating back to the corners of his mind. He could feel laughter in the air again, the laughter of the boy who rediscovered his true self. And so, with every flicker of resolve, he embraced the light. The shadows would always remain a part of him, but now, instead of feeling lost, he would learn to coexist with them, recognizing that he could face his fears bravely. In the depth of the whispering woods, Oliver discovered that strength flowed from within. The darkness couldn't truly take him, not as long as he held the memories of those he loved close to his heart. Eldermeyer continued to thrive beyond the sinister grip of those woods, safe and vibrant, while Oliver reclaimed his own spirit from its shadowy grasp. With a final burst of energy, he stepped out of the forest, no longer a boy lost to despair. He had confronted his darkest fears and emerged with a fierce light, shining brightly in the world beyond the trees. And while he would carry the lessons of the shadows with him, they would no longer define him. He was Oliver, a boy who bravely danced with his own darkness, and learned to illuminate the way for others too.